This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening. I'm very excited to have the lovely David with me. Hiya, David. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. My name is David Bishop, and as D.V. Bishop, I write the Cesare Aldo series of historical thrillers set in Renaissance Florence, which are published by Pan Macmillan. There's been 3 books in the series up to now, and the 4th book in the series, A Divine Fury, is or has been, depending upon when you're listening to this, published on the 20th of June in hardback, audiobook, and ebook. So yes, that's me.
So when did you decide today's the day that I'm going to sit down and I'm finally going to write the book that I've always wanted to write? What made you think, okay, that's it, it's happening?
Oh golly, I mean, I spent a lot of time writing a lot of other things before I started finally writing the crime novels. I used to write Doctor Who novels and audio dramas. I used to write comics. I still write the occasional comic. I wrote for Judge Dredd, Freddy Krueger's Nightmare on Elm Street. I did a Freddy Krueger novel where he tortured the Breakfast Club. And World War II vampire stories. And I used to write for Doctors, which is a continuing medical drama that used to be on BBC One for donkey's years. So I used to write for that. I wrote for a preschool show called Nina and the Neurons on CBeebies. So you name it, I've probably written just about everything you can point a stick at. And sort of, I think that the common element in almost all of those was that I was always writing stories that had some sort of mystery element to them, some sort of crime adjacent element. So even when I was writing Doctors, which is about, medical problems, it was always the mystery element that appealed most to me. And all the other things, they always had some sort of crime or mystery element to it. So I sort of eventually said, I'd spent a lot of time writing other people's characters, whether it was for TV or tie-in books or audio dramas or comics. And I was like, I had always wanted to write my own characters and my own stories and create the whole thing from scratch. But it took me a long time to sort of have the courage of my convictions, ironically, as a crime writer. So the first idea, the light bulb moment for the Cesare Aldo series was I picked up this book, which was a non-fiction book about the criminal justice system in late Renaissance Florence. And it fell open at this page and it said the criminal justice system 500 years ago was roughly comparable to a modern police force. And I was like, really? This was news to me. I didn't know that they had policemen 500 years ago. But no, they had courts, they had lawyers, they had constables, they had officers who investigated. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And I was like, wow, that would be great if I could write a crime novel and set it during the Renaissance in Florence, where you have all this amazing artwork and architecture and science and philosophy and thinking and all of these breakthroughs in human development emerging from the Dark Ages. And yet at the same time, you also have Machiavelli's The Prince and political backstabbing and poisonings and conspiracies and all these shenanigans, basically. So I thought it's a great setting that has sort of these breakthroughs and yet sort of the worst of human existence at the same time, often side by side. So I thought it's a great setting. And then I could do it as a police procedural. This is ticking all my boxes. And then, of course, I realized I don't actually know that much about Renaissance Florence. At least I didn't when I picked up this book and looked at it and went, oh, here's a great idea. And so I then spent 20 years not writing the first novel in the series because I knew it was a great idea, but executing it was the challenge, doing it well and pulling it off. It's the old thing. Everybody's got a book in them. Everybody's got a story they want to tell, but it's finding the time and the energy and the commitment and the want to do it. But it's also feeling like you have the ability and the confidence, sometimes the chutzpah, to go ahead and do it anyway, whether it's going to be good or not. So I spent a long time not writing the book. And eventually, after I stopped writing for Tally, and I had a couple of years where I wasn't writing much of anything, a few comic books, but that was about it. And I thought, maybe it's time. Maybe I'm never going to know everything, but I think I know enough to make a start. So why don't I do that? So I think I started officially. I wrote the first book in the series, the Eldo series. It's called City of Vengeance. So I wrote that as part of a PhD in creative writing, which I did part time by distance learning at Lancaster University. Um, Ironically, I still haven't finished the PhD, by the way. That's soon, honest. Um, Eventually, I mean, the pandemic didn't help. It has to be said. So I wrote the first book as part of that, which meant I got deadlines, I got supervision, I got somebody standing behind me saying, "When am I getting the next chapter?" And we all need that as writers. We all need somebody to go on. This looks promising. Give us some more. So I wrote that. I think I started in the summer of 2017. And then after about a year after that, I think it was September 2018, I did Pitch Perfect to Bloody Scotland, which is their annual crime fiction pitching contest where they get people to stand up and you get 3 minutes to sort of pitch your book, your idea, your story to a panel of industry experts. So there's agents and publishers and editors and people like that on this panel. Quite scary. And you do it in front of a live audience as well. You wouldn't want to do it in front of a dead audience. That would not be much of an audience. So you do it in front of a live audience and you have to stand up and you got your 3 minutes and you do your spiel and then you sit down and they give you some flash feedback, some feedback in the moment, which is also quite terrifying. And then you can relax because, the worst that can happen has happened. And we got to the end of that, and then the panel said, "Oh, and the winner is," and it was my pitch, to my pleasant surprise, because I was convinced somebody at the end of the row, the last person to pitch, was the winner on the day, but no, it was me, which was lovely. So that sort of gave me the kick up the behind to go on and finish the book, and then rewrite the book, and then rewrite the book again, because writing is rewriting. So I think it was about sort of somewhere between a year and a half and 2 years to get a draft. I was ready to start submitting, go out and query agents. Because although I'd had an agent when I was a TV writer, I'd never had a book agent, never had a literary agent, because a lot of the work I've been doing was boilerplate contracts. So there's nothing to negotiate. So it's you get the job, you don't get the job. And it was mostly built on contacts and networking. So I didn't need an agent to get the job. So therefore, why would you give away 15%? Whereas if you wish to be traditionally published with original fiction, by one of the big five, you certainly are going to need an agent. It's not a bad idea to have somebody in your corner who's going to do all the business stuff for you, who's going to go in and have those awkward conversations that sometimes need to happen, and who's looking out for your best interests, and who only gets paid if you get paid. Is the other thing, of course, about an agent. So I was out querying agents in the spring of 2019, and I was very lucky to have the wonderful Jenny Brown up here in Scotland, who took me on as her client. She's just been given an OBE for services to literature, which shows you how much of a superstar Jenny is. And then it went out on submission to editors. And then, the query trench has been out in submission. That's its own special kind of hell, I have to say. Because at least when you're, sorry, this is a very long answer. At least when you're querying agents, you have control over the process. You decide who you send it to. You know whether or not it's time to nudge them, etc., etc. But once your agent is then submitting to editors, then it's out of your control. That's it. You just have to sit there and wait and hope and see what's going to happen. So was out in submission. And I remember, I think the first month we were on submission, I was actually away in New Zealand visiting my family. And as a consequence of which, I was just on the other side of the world waiting for yeses or nos, and slowly going out of my head. And after about 3 weeks of this and the prospect of getting back on the plane for 30 hours to come back from New Zealand, I just sent this email to Jenny saying, "Please tell me something's happening." And she sent back a 3-word reply, which I'll always remember, which was "Keep the faith." That was it. That was her whole reply. "Keep the faith, Jenny." I was like, okay. Encouragement, I'll go with that. But as ever, Jenny was right. And we ended up with Pan Macmillan. They made an offer for the first 2 books in the series, because when I had book one, City of Vengeance, ready to go out on submission, Jenny said, well, you should have at least one page that pitches book two in the series, because publishers will tend to give you a 2-book contract because it's how they operate. They want to invest in you in the longer term. It's not just a 1-book thing for the most part. So I'd actually written pitches for books 2 and book 3 to go out. So it was like, well, as you like, this could be a trilogy, feel the urge. But the deal we made with Perry Macmillan was for the first 2 books in the series, A City of Vengeance and then The Darkest Sin. So I think the contract was signed July 2019. I think it was announced the week of Bloody Scotland that year, which was 1 year on from when I'd won Pitch Perfect. So it had a lovely symmetry to it. But then, of course, you sign a contract and it's like, oh, yes, we'll be publishing it, 10,000 years in the future. Because it's like traditional publishing, lovely, but not necessarily, turning on a sixpence. So they said, oh, well, we'll be publishing it in the beginning of 2021. And I'm like, that's a long time away. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and I was like, all my friends who had their debuts coming out in 2020 and were just having a horrible, horrible time and no events and nobody knew what to do. And I'm sitting back going, oh, well, actually, 2021's fine. Okay, I don't mind waiting a bit longer because bookshops will be open and, and events will be happening again. And, of course, we went back into lockdown in Christmas 20, and therefore, we got to February 2021 and the book came out. Depths of lockdown yet again, and digital launch and all those things. So it was, it wasn't quite the moment of whatever I thought it might be. It was a very different launch experience, debut experience as my first proper crime novel. I mean, I've had books published before, obviously, but this was sort of all me. It was like, this is going to be the big moment, and it's a different experience. But you get a book published, and so it's great. Sorry, that was the world's longest answer to whatever your question was.
You've answered like 10 other questions, so that's fine. So my next question is, once you started writing it, did you have regrets by choosing the time period or anything? I mean, you've done 20 years of research, so probably imagine you felt quite comfortable, but there must have been a point when you were writing thinking, oh God, why did I choose this area or this time period?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that I had to have sort of an etymology website open as a permanent tab on my browser just to go, did they have the word, whatever the word is? And then, I don't know, teenager. No, of course they didn't have teenager. No, that's a 20th century invention, just like serial killer's a 20th century invention is a term. But it's amazing the number of words they didn't have available to them in the period the first few books are set, which is the 1530s. So then I'm like, okay, well, they couldn't say this, so what would they say instead? So I spent a lot of time trying to get the language right. And then no matter how much research I did, there was always be some discovery I would make partway through writing the book that would throw a gigantic monkey wrench into the middle of things, and I have to go back and try and rewrite and fix it. And even then, there's still mistakes in the first book that I didn't appreciate I was making at the time, like, I don't know, pews in churches, which they didn't have in Italy at this point in history. If you went to church, you had to stand up, keep you honest, I guess. So as a consequence, everybody stood up in churches, and there's pews in the first book. So if we ever do some sort of, special edition, anniversary edition, I'm going to go through and remove all the pews. And the tomatoes, they didn't have tomatoes in Italian cuisine in the 50s. I know, right? You're thinking, what kind of pizza were they having? But no tomatoes. The tomato had only just arrived, and at this point in history in Florence, they believed the tomato was poisonous, but they sometimes had it as like a centerpiece, as a conversation piece on the table, so you could all look at it and go, "Ooh, what is this exotic weird thing?" Well, we don't know. We think it might be food, but apparently you can't eat it. It's poison. So it's hard to imagine Italian cuisine without tomato sauce in it somewhere. And yet they didn't. So there's a tomato stew in City of Vengeance, which is another thing I got wrong. But there you go. You can't get it all right. So, yes, I had regrets. I think my biggest regret was simply the fact that I'm not fluent in Italian, which would have probably come in quite handy. 2 years of Duolingo, and I still haven't really got any further than being able to describe that it's Alessandro and Matteo's wedding is in May. But yeah.
Yeah, probably the readers are grateful that you can't speak Italian though, because these
You could
days.
over.
Yeah. Also, as a side note, I managed to finish a degree in forensic science during the lockdown, so there's no excuse for the PhD. So you need to get on with it if you get it finished.
Well, yes. Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's the combination of writing a book a year and teaching 4 days a week and running 3 different postgraduate creative writing programs has slightly compacted my time, it has to be said. But yes, I'm hoping July will be the month I make some meaningful progress on my PhD. I have been saying that for 3 years now, so we shall see.
I started writing my book to distract myself from my dissertation.
Like a true writer, I salute you.
Yeah, that was smart. But hey, we got there. I got my degree. My book is now out, so it's fine. It all worked out at the end.
I mean, it's a marathon. It's not a Snickers. You just have to take time. You're not going to get, none of these things happen quickly. Even if you're self-publishing, you still have to write the book, which is going to take time, and then hopefully edit the book and all the other things. So, everything takes the time it's going to take. Some things take longer than you expect, but hopefully the book will, be there for a long time to come. So,
which of your characters did you have most fun writing, and which of your characters gave you most trouble?
Ooh, good question. Okay. I think probably the most trouble. So my main character is called Cesare Aldo, who's a gay man in Renaissance Florence who works for the Otto, which is the most feared and powerful criminal court. So he investigates crimes for the Ottos and tries to prevent other crimes as well. So he's my main character, but he frequently has a sidekick character of sorts, whose name is Carlo Strocchi, who starts in the first couple of books, he's a constable, and then he progresses through the ranks while Aldo's getting demoted because he's such a troublemaker. So we end up in Divine Fury, which is the new book, which is out this month. We end up with Strocchi's in charge of investigating the case, and Aldo's being made to assist his former assistant. So the tables have been completely turned. But Strocchi is a character. He's going on a considerable journey over the course of the books, because when we meet him in City of Vengeance, he's a relatively new constable. He's not from the city. He's not of Florence. He's from the countryside. So he's been brought up as a nice Italian Catholic boy and all the rest. And he believes black is black and white is white, and everything is what it is. But he's also quite naive, and he's not very worldly. So over the course of the series, he becomes increasingly worldly and becomes more knowledgeable about the variations of the world. So he can be quite a troublesome character sometimes for Aldo, and they don't necessarily always get on, because Aldo's methodology is very different from Strocchi, who's very straight up and down. There's not a lot. Strocchi is learning guile and cunning, whereas Aldo is basically being dipped in a vat of guile and cunning since he was a child. So they're quite different personalities. So the morality of Strocchi can be quite tricksy to write, and to because his attitudes are of the time, and that it's trying to strike a right balance with that, so that we have empathy for him as a character, and yet we understand why he is the way he is. Fortunately, now he's got a wife, Tommasia, who's sort of rounding some of the sharp edges off him as a character, which is helpful. The character I'm having the most fun writing at the moment is a new character in A Divine Fury, and she's the Contessa Valentine Coltello, and she is the city of Venice. She's their spy master in Florence, so she spies on Florence and what's happening there for the Republic of Venice, the Serene Republic of Venice. And she's very much inspired by the Glenn Close character from the film Dangerous Liaisons from the 80s, the Marquis de Métois. Or is it the Marquesa? Anyway, Glenn Close's character in Dangerous Liaisons is all you need to know. So she is, she's a one. I mean, she's mischief. She's a nuisance. She's trouble from go to woe. She will do anything. She never gets her own hands dirty, but she's quite happy to send other people to do her dirty work for her. She can see through anybody. And Aldo, despite being a gay man, meets her for the first time and actually finds himself slightly attracted to her, which is quite discombobulating for him because he's like, hang about, why am I responding to this woman? And what is it about? Basically, she could turn anybody's head is what it boils down to. And she's quite happy to use her abilities to turn people into her playthings, effectively. So she is such fun to write. So she's in Divine Fury, and she was only meant to be a relatively small character in Divine Fury, and you can tell you're having fun with a character when every time they turn up, they just steal the scene wholesale. They just stick it in their back pocket and wandering out the door with it. And you're just going, okay, fine. Just play with me a bit more, why don't you? So she was meant to be a small character in Divine Fury. She stole more and more of the book. And then the new book, number 5, which will be coming out next summer, which I'm so close to finishing right now. I'm maybe 3,000 or 4,000 words away from finishing it. So, just honestly, by the end of the weekend, if I had my time spare, then I would have it done. Anyway, so in book 5, I'm not allowed to say what the title is yet. So alas, I can't give you an exclusive because it hasn't absolutely been signed off just yet. But in book 5, the Contessa and Aldo end up going to Venice. And effectively, it's sort of like Renaissance Venice Mission Impossible Ocean's 8 is what it boils down to. So it's Canals 14. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, they end up in Venice and they're trying to steal something that has been taken to Venice from Florence. They're trying to steal it back, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And in fact, next to impossible. And that's where the bulk of the story takes place in Venice, which is the one place on Earth, the one city Aldo has sworn he will never go back there again. And he's got a very, very good reason he never wants to go back. And so the book actually opens with a flash forward whereby Aldo wakes up in a strange room, sniffs the air, hears noises outside, opens the shutter, and a gondola floats past. And he's like, oh, Venice. And then we go back and discover how it is that he's ended up in Venice, and then the book then flows on from there into this big heist capery thing that they're going to have to do. So yes, I'm having a blast writing book 5, and a lot of that is down to the Contessa. Yeah,
it sounds brilliant. I can't wait already, and it's not even finished writing it yet.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, 4 is literally just coming out as we speak. So 5 will be out, I guess, summer 2025. Yeah, I would imagine so, because traditional publishing, it's usually by the time you hand a manuscript in, it's usually about another year before it hits the shelves. Once after you get past the first book in the series, because obviously that takes a bit longer because it's all about positioning and getting it into the right time in the year and all of the rest. So,
how do you deal with the sort of the story arc and the timeline, because you're writing in a different period, and I suppose there's a limit before everything changes? So if you plan that into your books and the timeline.
Yeah, I have. Well, the first 4 books, each one is in a different season. So the first book started in winter. The second book was in spring, so it was about 3 months after book 1. And then for reasons I can't quite, jumped ahead like a year and months. I think it was 14 months, summer of the year after. And then book 4 is autumn a year on from that. So it's another 17 months have elapsed. And then, book 5 is only 3 months later, because just the way the calendar falls out, because it's in book 5 is set during Carnival in Venice, which is the weeks immediately before the beginning of Lent and the run up to Easter. So before Lent begins, everybody's having a wild old time with masks and parties and orgies and God knows what else. That's all in the backdrop of book 5. But I deliberately was trying to move on one season per book and roughly 1 year per book. So that was fine for the first 4 books. But I'm now into the start of what we would call 1540. And I know something is going to happen, and something does happen historically in July 1542 that's going to cause Aldo immense problems. So I'm trying to sort of slow the pace of how fast I get through the years before I get to that. But I mean, I'm under contract for books 5 and 6. Like I say, I've nearly finished book 5, and after book 6, you never know whether you'll get another contract to write more books on a series. I mean, I hope so, but it depends on sales. It's things beyond your control as a writer. So in my head, book 6 is going to be set in winter again. And then I'm even thinking about having it on the top of a hillside, the top of a very high hill during a snowstorm, and they're all going to be locked into the building effectively. Very Agatha Christie. But with shenanigans. So that would have to be winter for that to be credible. So that'll have to be winter at the end of 1540, which only leaves me about 19 months before the bad thing happens that's going to cause out all these problems. So yeah, because I'm using real history and real historical events inform the telling of the stories and how I position them and the shape of those stories. So that absolutely does have an impact. But I'm trying to create gaps in the storytelling and in events. So if needs be, there's opportunity to squeeze a wee story in here, maybe novellas into places. So I'm about to write at the end of book 5. There's going to be like a 5-day gap in the narrative where basically Aldo is just on his way back to Florence at the end of the book. So then, for events to play out. But I'm deliberately going to sort of gesture in the direction of things that have happened while they were on the road back to Florence, because it's a long way back and had to stay overnight and things occurred. So I'm deliberately going to drop in sort of little Easter eggs that might lead off to other stories that could occur in the timeline of Aldo as a character. It's the old Sherlock Holmes things about the incident with the giant rat of Sumatra, which is mentioned in the Conan Doyle's, but obviously they never wrote a story about the giant rat of Sumatra. And of course, long after Conan Doyle dies, everybody's like, oh, I can't wait to write the Sherlock Holmes versus the giant rat of Sumatra story. So yes, so mine's going to allude to the incident with the mongoose. But that's it. That's all it's going to say, incident with the mongoose. And I'm just going to leave that hanging there. And some point in the future, I can come back and write about the incident with the mongoose if the urge overtakes me. I should point out, I have checked that they did have the mongoose in Italy at that point in history.
Italy was bad at that time. That's just, blow my mind up. No tomatoes and mongoose. Weird.
I mean, all sorts of things were going on. So yes, all sorts, absolutely.
When you're editing, or when your editor gets hold of your book, what do they shout at you most about? What words do you overuse, or what phrases do you overuse?
One I remember in a Divine Fury in the draft that went to my editor, he was like, "Okay, I think we've had enough metaphors about things being fish pulled out of the Arno," and I was like, "Yeah, okay, fair enough." I know I have certain stock phrases I will use, so I will relax and write them in the first draft, and then I'll go through as part of my cut and polish before it goes to my editor, the wonderful Alex Saunders at Pan Macmillan. And I'll say, so I'll try and eliminate things before he comes back and says, yeah, maybe not that again. Because it's set 500 years, 485 years in the past, I do try and, rather than somebody saying, I don't know, he's a pain in my neck, which is too modern an idiom. So I try and invent substitutes for that. So one of the ones I use is, he's a stone in my shoe, which says the same thing. We all know what it means, but it doesn't sound like somebody speaking in a modern vernacular. So I try and come up with substitutions for those sorts of common phrases, but you don't want to overuse those. And obviously, I'm addicted to the word just. So that has to be, I have to do a search and replace to eliminate just. I managed to stop myself using barely and hardly and only, but just still creeps in, unfortunately. And what I will do often is I will send a book to my editor, and then while I'm waiting for him to read it, because he'll read it the first time as a reader, and then he'll go through it the second time, and he'll be making some notes, and then he'll read it the third time, and then he'll come up with his edit letter, which is his big notes, and then he'll give me a marked up copy of the manuscript to go through. Okay, right, this is where I'm talking about here. Not really clear. Is this making sense? What's the timeline? All those sorts of questions. All those the really helpful things that just make the book so much better. So what I will often do, if I've got the time, is I'll send the book, and then the back of my head, the subconscious will be going, did that really work that bad? Is this they're not a bad? Had you thought maybe, or possibly? So I will start making notes for myself. So I write like bullet points of all the things I think need fixing in the book, because there'll be stuff, and some of it, hopefully, most of it isn't big problems. Most of it's small stuff that can just, infelicities, let's call them. But I mean, for Divine Fury, when I wrote that, and I was quite pushed for time just because I had a lot of things other on at the time, and I lost, I think I wrote the first 16,000 words, and then I just felt like, oh, this isn't working. So I had to step away, and I had to pull that opening apart and then reconfigure it and then figure out actually what should be happening. So I lost quite a bit of time at the start, which meant I was having to write quite a lot. So I was writing quite quickly to get to deliver by deadline. And 30 pages from the end, I changed who the killer was in the book, and because I went, it's too obvious. This is too obvious. I've all the signs are pointing at this person. Does it have to be them? What if it was? Oh, well, if I do that, golly. That's going to need some rewrites to make that work, because otherwise the danger is the reader will feel like I've cheated them if I pull that one out of my back pocket on page 10 from the end and go, oh, actually it was this person the whole time. Because if I was a reader, that's the sort of thing that would make me fling the book across the room. So I sent the book off to my editor. I went to BoucherCon, which was in San Diego last year, because I thought it would be nice to go just for once. And it was nice to go. It was fascinating. And I watched this panel, and David Baldacci was on this panel, and because he's quite prolific. But he talked about the fact that sometimes he'll write a book and he'll send it to his editor, and he'll say to his editor in advance, okay, this is a pin ending, because I just had to stick a pin in this, and I haven't got the whole thing. I've got most of it. It's like 95, 96% of the way there, but I haven't quite absolutely got the whole thing in my grasp. So we'll stick a pin in it, and then you read it and think about it, and I'll be thinking about it, and then we'll get together and we'll figure out what needs done to make it the book it should be. So when I sent a Divine Fury in, I hadn't had time to do what was necessary to make it the final version of itself, but I didn't have time. So I just had to send it to Alex and go, okay, this is a pin ending, explain what a pin ending is, and then go, let's talk. Once you've read it, let's talk, because there's a big decision to be made. If this person is the killer, therefore, there can be two answers to how it is that they're the killer, and we didn't know up to this point. And between the two of us, we'll choose, and I will rewrite to make that work on the page. So that's what we did. And actually, ironically, this keeps coming back to Bloody Scotland, but each year at Bloody Scotland, Alex will come up to the festival in Stirling, and he'll take me out for lunch, usually on the Saturday. We keep ending up in TGI Fridays. I'm not quite sure why, but hey-ho. Slightly disappointing cuisine, but there it is. And then we will talk about the book, and because he's read it, and obviously I've written it, and then generally we haven't, depends, but yeah, we'll then have the conversation about what needs fixing, what's working about it, and then what I'm thinking of doing next. So that's what we did. We sort of put the book to rights over some disappointing chicken wings and chips and fries with strange dressing on in TGI Fridays and during Bloody Scotland. And then I went off and did the rewrites, and away we went. So yes, can't remember what the question was, but there you go. That's the answer.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a TGIs in Stirling. I must have missed that completely.
I mean, maybe it's not it feels like it's a TGI Fridays, but maybe it's just that kind of thing, that kind of vaguely Tex-Mex kind of burger and chicken kind of place.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't explored that much. Usually, by the Golden Line, and that's it, really. So
Yes, yeah. Well, it's other side of the road, going up the hill, and just when you get sort of where the Wallace thing is, it's on as you're going up the hill, it's on the left, right on that corner before you go around and start heading up and then down towards the Albert Halls. Anyway, it's there. Not that I'm giving it a 5-star recommendation as a food choice, but you can always get a table, so I guess that does the job.
We usually just go to Spoons because Spoons is cheap.
Yeah. Well, when your editor's paying that, there's less of a consideration, but we at least have that many expensive restaurants. So, because it's a student town, and students need to eat. So,
yes, this is very true. On the subject of festivals, so I guess you'll be doing Bloody Scotland. Are you doing any others or any other event?
What am I doing this year? I mean, so far this year I'm trying to remember. I was at the Colonsay Book Festival, which is a small island in the Hebrides, in or out, or I can't remember. Anyway, you have to drive to Oban and get a ferry for 2.5 hours to get to the festival. And then when you get to the island, there is 8 kilometers of road on the entire, basically you just drive around the island and that's it. And there's one old friend. Anyway, so I did the Colonsay Book Festival, which was great. But that was sort of a range of literature. And I did Crime Fest down in Bristol, where I saw you. And I am at Harrogate. I'm not on any of the official events, but I'm doing an event, Pam Macmillan event. A lot of the big 5 publishers now have their own sort of fringe events dotted around the hotel at Harrogate, thereabouts. So I'm doing an event with the amazing Laura Shepherd Robinson in the Dead, I think Pam Macmillan called it the Dead Giveaways tent, because they give away things, not death. Fortunately. So I think we're Saturday afternoon, 2:00 in the Dead Giveaways tent. So I'll be at Harrogate, but mostly otherwise I'll just be failing to get to the bar and having conversations. That's the amazing thing about Harrogate is you never quite get to the bar because there's always somebody else to talk to, and then you move past and no, somebody else. And I think 3 years at Harrogate and I still haven't managed to have a conversation with Rob Parker. I keep seeing him and we never quite managed to get to the point we're in. There's always somebody else to talk to. Anyway, one day, Rob, one day. And I'll be at Harrogate, but just sort of mooching about for fun and going in the quiz. And then I'm at Bloody Scotland. I'm at the Bookmark Festival in Blairgowrie, where I'm chairing the amazing Chris Whitaker, talking about We Begin at the End, or no, We Finish at the End, whatever it is, and his new book, All the Colours of Night, I think it is, which I haven't read yet, but I've got to read that because I'm chairing him. And I think that's most of the things I'm doing. I'm doing lots of bookshop events as well. But yeah, so I'll be at Harrogate, I'll be at Bloody Scotland. I'm not allowed to say what I'm doing at Bloody Scotland because they're not announcing the program until
20th, isn't it, actually? Yeah.
Thursday this week, the 20th, yeah, because they're doing the launch with Val, doing a special event with Val and a launch on Thursday while I'm busy running around bookshops in Edinburgh signing copies because the book's out on Thursday. So yeah, and then I've got my launch event on Thursday night with the amazing people from the Edinburgh bookshop. So yes.
Yeah, I was invited to that, but it's like 8 hours of travel, and it starts at 7 o'clock in the evening, and I finish work at 6. So not going to happen.
No. Well, this is it. I mean, I love to get invites to things, but like invites to events in London, I'm like, I mean, and people say, I'd love to, I want to invite you, so you still exist. Thanks. But I know you're probably never going to come. No. I will be at the Daggers dinner, so CWA Daggers dinner, which is on election night, actually. It's on the 4th of July.
Yes, heard about it.
So that's going to be entertaining. But yeah, because I've just been elected onto the board of the CWA, actually. So because I figured, it gives something back, be helpful to other people if possible. So I go alone. So I'm at the Daggers dinner, and then we've got the board meeting the next day. So I'll be at that. But I've got no dogs in that hunt. I'm on no shortlists this year. So but hey, I won the historical dagger up next year, so they can't prize that away from my cold dead fingers just yet.
If you're able to spend a day with any author, dead or alive, who would you like to spend a day with?
Oh, golly. Oh, that's a good question. Oh, you've stumped me with that one. By me. Yeah, I mean, I'd want it to be somebody I think I could get along with. I mean, I'm not sure me and Agatha Christie are going to have an awful lot in common. And similarly, I think it would have been interesting for about 10 minutes to meet J.R.R. Tolkien, but I think after that, the gap would have been so vast that I don't think we would have had that much to talk about. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's that many dead authors I would be rushing necessarily to talk to, just because most of them, their lives are so far removed from my own. I'm not sure what we'd talk about. I mean, I did once. I was at I chaired an event at the Edinburgh International Book Festival, and I got talking to a writer who I have a mutual friend in common with. So I saw them there, and I went up and introduced myself, and we talked about our mutual friend, and then we just had a general quick chat. And I was just about to excuse myself, and then a quite petite woman sort of slightly bounded over and started talking to this other writer. And I looked at this woman who just arrived with a Canadian accent, and in my head, now I have to say before I go any further, am I allowed to swear on your podcast? Okay, all right. So it was Margaret Atwood had bounced up to come and have a conversation, and I looked at her, and then I looked at the person I was talking to, and I looked at Margaret Atwood, and I went, fuck me, it's Margaret Atwood. And I was so terrified that I was about to just say, fuck me, you're Margaret Atwood. That I figured I would just politely excuse myself from the conversation and go and get myself a coffee, because I wasn't sure I'd be able to hold it in for much longer. So I don't know. I think Margaret Atwood, maybe. Let's throw Margaret Atwood in the mix. She's written, Blind Assassin. It's a great crime novel. And then, Handmaid's Tale and all the rest. So I think she'd be good crack, actually. Yeah, let's go for Margaret Atwood.
I mean, you should have, you're not going to get many opportunities, because I saw Lee Child last year at Harrogate, and what a nice man. What a down-to-earth, normal man. So I'm so glad that I didn't chicken out and totally fangirl and lose my cool and spoke to him, because he was just chatting about growing up in this country and stuff. Could it have been more normal? Very odd.
Yeah. No, exactly. I had an opportunity to go over and say hello to Tom Baker about nearly 30 years ago now. It was at something at the Birmingham NEC, and I was manning a table for 2000 AD, because I used to edit 2000 AD, and we were launching a range of action figures. And Tom Baker was across the corridor, across the gap, and then 2 tables along, and I think it was his book, The Boy Who Kicked Pigs, or something he was flogging. And I was on a Saturday, and I thought, oh my God, it's Tom Baker, it's Tom Baker, it's Tom Baker, oh my God, it's Tom Baker. And I wanted to go over and say hi, and I could not muster the courage to go and do it. I was like, I'll do it tomorrow, absolutely. I'll get. And of course he was only there on the Saturday. And so I went in the next morning, he was like, oh no, he was just there for Saturday. I was like, no, I'm never going to have that opportunity. You schmuck, you utter poophead. So yeah, that was kind of frustrating. So after that, I was just like, okay, if you see somebody of note, just get it together and go. They're just another person, honestly. But yes, I did. I think it was Harrogate 2 years ago, and I was trying to muster the courage to go up and talk to Val McDermid, and I was really struggling to do it. And then I made the mistake of having one too many pints to try and go and have that conversation with Val McDermid. And she must be so used to people wandering up to her, slightly weaving as they approach her. And she was thinking, oh, here's another one. Too much Dutch courage. And I was trying to form sentences, and it wasn't pretty, frankly. So, yeah. the good news is, in the case of Val, at least, I was at Shetland Noir last year, and she was one of the guests there. So I had a good old. I was having a conversation with Ali Griffiths, and then Val came over, and then we had a general chat, and it was fine, and I didn't freak out. So yeah, no, it was fine. It was fine. So yes,
She's quite
I think
intimidating, isn't she? I've never really had a conversation with her. I must admit, she is quite an intimidating lady, even though she's very small. She's quite.
yeah, oh, yeah, and it's just, and you can have a a perfectly good conversation with her, and it's fine, And actually, I think it was at Harrogate last year, and Nicola Sturgeon was there before all the things that have happened since, and she was there, and I just turned around, it was like Nicola Sturgeon. I just went, I said, just for like, I was a big admirer of what she was doing when she was First Minister. I was like, so I just went over and thanked her and said, yeah, I live in Scotland, and thank you very much. And if you could get rid of our MP, our Tory MP, that would be great, please. But that's politics for you. I suspect he's somehow still going to get in when all the rest are going to be wiped off the map, and he's still going to be like a limpet, and we can't get rid of. But there you go.
Maybe. I'm not sure this year. I think this year's gonna. You never know. She's my regret. Actually, I saw her at Harrogate, and I never went and said hello. I missed my opportunity, so she's my regret, because I thought she was pretty cool, even though I'm not living in Scotland. I thought what she was doing was impressive as a female MP. So,
oh yeah. And that's it. I think you have to try and grab these moments when they come towards you and just step in and go, hello, just like to shake your hands and all the rest. And yeah, I mean, like Craig Sisterson introduced me to Sean Cosby at Harrogate last year, and I sort of shake his hand, and I'm just like, but you sort of go, hey, oh, you're amazing. It's like, yeah, okay, to them, and they're like, oh, thanks, that's very kind of you to say. But that kind of kills the conversation stone dead.
yeah,
So it's like, well, where do we go from here? You think I'm amazing? Well, thanks very much.
yeah, he's another lovely man, isn't he? Very, very down to earth.
Oh, he absolutely is. There's, and he's very honest about the fact he grew up, dirt poor and all the rest. So to him, and also it's taken him a long time to get to the success that he's having. So you sort of go, brilliant, well done, you. It's you've done the hard yard, you've put the work in to get there. So complete respect, and also just amazing writing on the page. So
yeah. So I suppose we should really talk about. You should tell us about the book that's coming out in 2 days' time.
Let's give it a go. So A Divine Fury, it's called. It's the fourth in a Cesare Aldo series of historical thrillers set in Renaissance Florence, but you don't need to have read the previous books in the series. You can dive straight into A Divine Fury if you so wish. So in the book, it opens with my lead character, Cesare Aldo. He has been demoted to constable. He is now at least back in Florence. In the previous book, Richard the Fire, he was out in the countryside for most of it and a bit grumpy about the whole thing. He's now back in Florence, but he's still being punished for previous incidents. So he's been stuck on the graveyard shift on night patrol for 17 months. And now it's autumn, it's raining, he's on night patrol, and he's there's somebody, because they have curfew, so nobody's meant to be out at night. And then he's stalking somebody through the city who is out illegally, and he's trying to figure out who they are and why they're out illegally. And he pursues this person and then discovers a corpse lying in the main square, the main piazza of Florence, next to the Michelangelo statue of the David, which at this point was the original version of the statue. They later moved it indoors, and there's a copy of it that's out there now. But you can see it at the Accademia, and it's amazing. Tiny penis, but amazing nonetheless. You've got to call it like it is. I mean, he's in great shape, but honestly, so anyways, Aldo finds a corpse lying next to the statue, which is 17 meters tall, and the corpse is lying there, and the guy's been strangled to death, but he's been positioned like he's been crucified, like he's Christ on the cross. And he's got, and then an ash has been smeared on his forehead, which looks like a cross as well. It's like, well, plainly this is some sort of religious element to this killing has happened. So what's going on here? So Aldo starts to investigate, and then the next morning, Another corpse is found in another public square south of the River Arno in Santa Spirito. And again, position like Christ on the cross, ash on the forehead. Except this time it's got a word written in ash on the forehead. So it's like, okay, this. Now, obviously, they don't have the term serial killer in the 16th century. So they know that this is a different kind of killer from the normal thing. It's not about lust or money or power or hatred or revenge. This is a different kind of killing. This is somebody's killing for the sake of killing, or for some reason it's not clear. So they are investigating a serial killer, effectively, Aldo and his now boss, sort of, Strachey. And all the evidence starts to point towards a particular church, which is called the Church of San Felice St. Felix, which is south of the river in Florence. And that's where the exorcisms are done in Florence. If you need anybody, you need the demons driven out of anybody, you take them to this church, and that's where it happens. So the evidence is pointing that somehow these killings are linked to either that particular church or the exorcist and his assistant who work there. And on we go. So that's the main story. But at the same time, Aldo is basically commissioned by the Duke of Florence, Cosimo de' Medici, to get close to the person we mentioned earlier, Contessa Coltello, who's the Venetian spy master in Florence. Aldo's got to try and cozy up to her and get information out of her. She's far too canny for that, but he realizes she's far too canny for that. So they've got a whole thing going on. A whole will they, won't they, like each other, love each other, kill each other, who knows? So yes, so that's the sort of the B story that's rumbling on in the background of that. So yeah, so that's a Divine Fury: serial killers, exorcists, and Venetian spy mistress.
Well, I can't think of any more questions to ask you, unless you think there's anything really obvious that I've forgotten to ask.
No. It's been great. No, I mean, keep me away from a donkey sanctuary, because I can talk the hind leg off any passing, four-legged creature. So,
I mean, I could talk to you all night as well, but there's like to get it on Instagram, it has to be under an hour. So,
well, in which case we'll keep it brisk and we'll finish there.
Well, remind everyone where they can find out more about you and where they can buy your book from, which is what we're here for.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully. So you can find me. My website is dvbishop.com. I have an author newsletter on Substack, which is dvbishopsubstack.com, I think. But just look dvbishop and Substack, you'll find me. And I'm on sundry other social media. I am at Cesare Aldo on Instagram. I've been on Twitter for so long, I'm actually at David Bishop, because I've been on Twitter for so long. But you'll find me on my website and all those sorts of places. And I'm mostly tending to be on Instagram a little bit more these days. And the book is available in all good bookshops. Go to your independent bookshop, go to bookshop.org and order it there. Divine Fury, out in hardback, audiobook, wonderful narrator, reader called Mark Meadows, does an amazing job. His Italian is impeccable, chef's kiss, and the ebook is available as well.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.